Welcome to BW Healthcare World's Thursday Thought Leaders. Our guest today is Dr. Shriram Nene, a UCLA-trained cardiovascular surgeon, someone who's practiced in Denver as a cardiovascular and thoracic surgeon. He is someone who's trained in robotic surgery. Dr. Nene and his wife, Madhuri Dixit Nene, along with their sons, Arin and Ryan, moved to India. Dr. Nene, with the purpose of being useful to a larger set of people, has turned an angel investor in health tech startups and is also the founder of Pathfinder Health Sciences. So welcome to BW Healthcare World, Dr. Nene. It is such a pleasure to have you with us today.
It's my honor, and congratulations on, what did you say, 45 years in
42 years.
42 years. That's remarkable in India. And so thank you for doing everything you do.
Thank you so much. So Dr. Nene, let me begin with a very basic question, and it goes back to when you were a child. You technically did a startup when you were 15 years old, when you learned computer programming and you created a software for real estate agents, if I'm correct to understand that. Yeah.
Yes.
A lot of the coders at that age are geeks, but they fail to think of doing a startup at that age. And that 2 years ago when startup was not such a buzzword. How did you think of starting your own venture when you were 15 years of age?
So it's a great question. I didn't really perceive it as a startup, and that's what made it easy. I mean, kids and teenagers are fearless. They don't suffer from the same apprehensions and framework that adults do. And as a result, when my dad brought a Apple IIe computer home when I was 11, there were no teachers back in the early 80s. And so I had to learn everything myself. And it gave me a world that I could explore. And the interesting thing is, I was an all-rounder. I played varsity tennis. I did all kinds of things, but this was just something which was interesting to me. And I've always been kind of a gearhead. I like engineering. I like creating things. The second thing which was interesting is in my elementary school, of all places, they had some key skills that they taught. And one was that there was one exercise I remember very vividly where they had you create a company and design a product. And we created this company called Acme Rockets after the Roadrunner cartoon. And basically what we did is we took pieces of wood, cut them out, created rockets, and painted them with the USA flag, and we sold them with fake money, and we created profits. And then they taught us how to run checkbooks and how to do that. And this was hardly in like 6th or 7th grade. So quite ahead of its time back in the 70s and 80s. What I realized back then was that you could create all kinds of interesting concepts and constructs which would improve people's lives. And if you could create platform services and products which people would value, the reward and the secondaries could be anything you wanted, fame, fortune, this and that, but that's not why you did it. You were passionate about it. And so with the coding part, I went in, head first, and I learned how to code first in the basics. Back then, we didn't have the fancy languages like C++ and all of that. I learned in Machine, Fortran, Cobol, Turbo Pascal, and then basic with an assembler. And then, my mom was a real estate broker, and she had a real estate farm, and all of her colleagues could not manage that farm. So what I did was created a CRM solution, which is what you call it now, a customer relationship manager. And what it would do is keep track using a database which we created, and it's just an array of data which we put into back then a 5.25-inch floppy disk, because there was no cloud, there was no internet, there was nothing. And we basically created all those, and then we created an interface for printers so we could create mailing labels, and we could also keep track of who had mailers sent out and who had that. And my mom and her colleagues paid me, and I was like, this is the best summer job and fall and spring job that I've ever had. And I'd done a lot of things, and my parents were very conservative Maharashtrians who had come up humbly from the middle class in India. And my dad had a scholarship to Imperial College, and I was born in London and then moved to the US. So he always taught us the value of education. And so when I started doing these business things, he was like, what is he doing? You know, he has to be either a doctor, engineer, or we won't pay. And so I went on to create that construct, and we generated some revenue. And it wasn't, I didn't raise money. It wasn't like a listed company or anything like that. And then, you know, I went on later to create some software for the University of California and as a consultant, and they basically took all my IP away because they had paid me for the summer job. But in return, I got mentioned in proceedings of the National Academy, and this thing would take large databases from the Los Alamos database and compare species to see whether they were homogeneous or heterogeneous. And we published something which was quite remarkable. And that would help me with my med school applications. So I did a lot of stuff with low pay or for free, but I was learning the business concepts to the point where when I was applying for colleges, I had won a scholarship from the Business Times and the Independent Press Telegram. And it was very remarkable for me because Ray Bradbury gave me the award, and it came with a $750 scholarship. Not much, but I had a bunch of other scholarships. And what I recognized is that what you could do with knowledge, if you could master it and apply it and create value for people, was remarkable. And I didn't do it for the money. I did it because it was interesting. And so I think now it's even come full circle that these kids are actually doing it as startups where they're fixing gap problems and they're taking it to that. And so I was able to get into Stanford and UC Berkeley and all of these schools, but my parents said, you either become a doctor or engineer or we won't pay for it. And I ended up going to Washington University in St. Louis, which is a phenomenal school because they had a guaranteed undergrad med program. And, you know, the interesting part, just a side story, my dad had a colleague who was a doctor, and doctors in the US did very well in the 80s and 90s. And so that's what he saw as an engineer, that, you know, these guys were, you know, had job security. They never had to rely on anyone, whatnot. So they did the best they could with what they had. Come full circle now, I'm encouraging my kids to follow their dreams and to learn because they're passionate about it within reason. And also to do the best they can and do it for the right reasons, not because you want to make $1 trillion. That'll happen if it's supposed to happen. But I would say the bigger part of that is create something that we need that improves life on this planet and creates impact and makes things better for everyone. And you will be rewarded.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Dr. Nene, you brought me, you made a nostalgia when you were speaking about COBOL, Fortran, and floppy disks. So it took me back to my school days.
I'm aging us both, right?
But you know what you really brought up was a very beautiful point, and I think it's very important for kids of today when they're looking at doing startups. You know that the fearlessness is what drives you. When you're not fearful of what the outcome is going to be, when you are not doing things with self-doubt, is when you will succeed. And finding a purpose to do that is really beautiful. But you know, Dr. Nene, as kids, when we are tinkering with our technology, computers, etc., we've created programs, we've seen our success. We tend to move towards that journey and endeavor to do even better in what we enjoy doing. And you touched upon it, but can you elaborate on how come medical? I mean, you were so good in computer engineering, software development. How did you move from technology to medical side to get to be a trained surgeon?
So it's a great question. I wanted to be the Renaissance man, and my mentors were people, who I had read immense amounts of. They were way before us, but these guys who were categorically doing amazing things in history, and like Da Vinci, Michelangelo, they were never in one space. And back then you could wear many different hats. And so even in the program I was in at WashU, the Scholars Program in Medicine, you could take whatever major you wanted. You could as long as you finish the prelims for medicine, but they gave you a little bit of scope to learn other things. So I, had a biology major. I had a computer science concentration. I also took history because I loved history, and I did a little bit in chemistry as well. And what it allowed me to do is experiment and explore. Then when I went to the one thing about medicine is that it combines some of the best things which I had experienced in my life: leadership, science, humanistic behaviors, creating impact, dealing with people. It was also rigorous, like sports, which I had played, and it brought together a lot of those elements. And as I, started med school, it was incredibly rigorous at WashU, but they had 11 Nobel laureates at the time and $1 billion in funding. Now they have even more. But the main thing was people were so passionate about the science. And for me, I loved that part of it because it was the pursuit of something in its purest form for the good of mankind. And as I finished that, I went into general surgery, and I was at UCLA for a while, and I learned immense amounts of stuff while taking care of good people, and also did 2 years in lab researching vascular surgery. And then I went and did a cardiothoracic fellowship. But what it combined were all of the elements of everything that I had learned: science, all of the math, all of the humanistic elements into one thing. And there wasn't. I love working with my hands, and so there wasn't a day when I was a heart surgeon where I didn't enjoy kind of mentally and physically tearing things down, breaking them up, and at the end making a huge difference in people's lives. And so it was very rewarding. And the real question is, why didn't you stick to technology and business? And I got a lot of pushback. It's very interesting. A good friend of mine, we were talking about this, and his whole family is doctors. And you may know him, Ritesh Malik, but he was saying the same thing, that he wanted to quit med school when he was a second year, and he got so much pushback from his parents. It was the same for me. And remember, in those times, you had to be a doctor or engineer, or you weren't good enough. I mean, this is a typical Indian immigrant as well as Indian story, right? He pushed back, and he went and did the London School of Economics, and to his credit has had a lot of successful startups. I did that much later in 2011 when I came back to India to create impact by scaling medicine using media tech and smart services, as well as creating an edutech, as well as creating a film company. And I got to kind of use all of my learnings along the way in medicine. So to answer your question, I enjoyed experiencing, right? I'm a Renaissance thinker. I like to do a lot of different things. And even now, if I'm not doing this, I'm playing guitar or I'm learning something. I say the day you stop learning is the day you aren't around, because that has to be a central focus for your whole life. And learn for the right reasons, not the wrong reasons. Learn because you love to learn, not because they're forcing the IIT JEE down your throat.
That's very beautifully explained, Dr. Nene. Now, while people call you a cardiologist, you have played an active role in reinventing technology, integrating healthcare and technology in the most innovative manner. Now, with your venture, what are the key segments that you aspire to cover, and what have been your plans on expanding the same?
Yeah, so I want to clarify one thing, and it's a small thing. I'm a heart surgeon, and so we actually open chests and sew corners on. Cardiologists work with catheters and echoes and things like that, and everyone is complementary. But to your question, look, as a heart surgeon, I could operate on 3 to 5 patients in a day. And at the end of the year, at most, you could operate on maybe 500 patients, see another 2,000 consults. It's not a scalable discipline. Even if you own the hospitals, at most, my best friends who run hospital chains can do maybe 1,000 cases with someone else opening and closing, whatnot. The issue is there's 7 billion people on the planet, now 8 billion, right? And what I saw as I progressed in my career is that I was the head of a hospital, partner in a group. We had everything. But what I couldn't do is take all of my skill sets and apply them for greater impact. So when I came back to India, I said, look, in India, there's a particular issue. There's 1.35 billion people. And it's not one India, it's 28 states, 9 union territories, comprised of 30% metro areas, 70% rural areas. And the level of care is not the same, to the point that our life expectancy is 10 years less than the Western world. We don't live to more than 68 or 69 on average. And we're a younger population. That makes it even worse that 2/3 of our population is less than 35 years old. And so in the US, it was approximately 80. It's gone down with the pandemic and as well as the opioid crisis. But overall, in the Western world, the level of care is much higher. Now, contrast that against the spend, which is 4% of the GDP in India is spent on healthcare, of which only 1/3 of that is government spend, 2/3 is private pay, compared to the US now, which is 18% of their GDP spent on healthcare. I can't say that they're necessarily better. They're not the best healthcare system in the world versus Japan or some of the European nations or other places where the cost is lower and the life expectancy is higher. But what I said is, if I could come back to India and take care of more people by using scalability. And back then when I came, my thought was to use disseminated instances, using phones and other things to get to the last mile and change how people think. Because as I see it, the gap worldwide as well as in India is a lack of awareness and a lack of access to world-class evidence-based international standards. And because of that, it's not uniform in the care you get. And what I said is, look, we need to become the doctor in your pocket 24/7, 365 from the cradle to the grave, aligned with your interests, not with the business of medicine. And when we do that, when the biggest shareholder of our endeavor is the patient, all of a sudden you're going to change the way medicine is practiced. So how do you do that? You change the way you render care, and you reduce the cost by doing that. You empower the patient to be their own best advocate, and you give them the medical system that they need around them when they need it. I'll give you an example. How many times do you go to a doctor in a year?
Maybe twice in a year.
Yeah, and when do you go?
Usually when I have a fever or cold, flu.
So there you go. That it's when you're sick.
Yes.
And what I would say now is that we need to move beyond that so that you learn about what it makes you up, because everyone's different. And so the real issue is, in coming back here, I said that if we can design a system which is customized to the patient, looking at their genetics, their medical history, their past medical history, their medications, their family history, their social history, their socioeconomic background, and design something which educates, entertains, and engages them to do the right things always, and then to have the tools to give them a virtual dashboard and then give them the virtual networks. So what I think of is, who do I refer my family to? That's what I want you to have. And when that happens, no matter where you are in India, when we democratize healthcare as we know it, giving everyone the same standards and building their expectations to know what to expect given any heart ailment, then all of a sudden, life as we know it in India will change. And that's, my story as to why I came.
No, that's really beautiful. I think you brought in a very beautiful point about being able to help a larger set of people than just the 3 or 4 people that you do your surgery on. Now, Dr. Nene, what are some of the things you worked in the US and you worked in India? From the heart care, from a surgeon point of view, from the healthcare point of view, what is the difference that you find in heart care in the US versus what you see in India? Do you think we are now at par with the Western world, or maybe even better? Or do you feel that we still have a journey to cover?
So to start with, we have 1 million doctors serving 1.35 billion patients in India. These are 1 million allopathic docs, of which only 2% go to the rural areas. So immediately you have a doctor to patient mismatch. And so one of the key delimiters is that it's not uniform in how we deliver care, right? If you're in South Bombay, for instance, your doctor to patient and bed to patient ratio is far different than if you're in the middle of a rural area, Bhopal or Patna, or and even farther into the second, third, and fourth tier towns as to what you can expect to get. So to answer your question, in the best centers, in the best cities, we're on par. And the question is it uniform? Is it egalitarian? Is it democratic? I would say no. Who you know matters, right? And your access to care differentiates by that. The biggest problem I see, and this will lead to a further question for you, is that the first responder systems and the ability to get people to care in a timely fashion are not always there. And further, to react to it, I mean, I feel like we're more reactionary than proactive, right? So I think one thing in India, which the pandemic taught us with the war rooms and bed boards and other things, is that we need logic. We need provocative and progressive logic to see what would be the best fit for any given patient who's being transported. Secondly, we need awareness so that people recognize in time, and even before they get into trouble, that they need to go in. Because as you said, I go to the doc twice a year when I'm sick. But the point is, if your risk factors and symptoms are there, then you need to get in there much sooner, and then there's a chance that we can save you. In India, it seems to me that to some degree, it's often a natural history study in terms of how disease presents in many cases, in that they come in very late in the disease puzzle. And that varies depending on if you're in a high ratio metro area versus the outskirts. But if we're going to improve lifespans and lifestyles, the only way we can do it is by empowering patients. So to answer your question, do we have the ability to deliver care? Yes. This brings up a second point, that we have a marvelous opportunity for medical tourism. It's something we're working on because our cost for delivery is much lower than the West. And so if we can bring in, people from abroad at the same time and increase the overall throughput, at the same time giving back to our native population, I see a win-win here, because you're going to get the latest tools and perhaps improve overall scale, right? And so I see a lot of areas where we can improve care, which are potentially possible. If you're in a metro, 30% of India, in other words, you're in better shape. If you're in the rural areas, you won't have that level of care. And that's the mixed bag. Is that true in the US? Yes, absolutely true. If you're at the tertiary quaternary care hospitals, you're going to get better care than if you're in the rural areas or going to a PPO or HMO or whatever. And I've lived through those systems. I think there they have different limitations and different struggles in terms of payer systems and insurance and, all of that. And the business of medicine is quite daunting. Here, it's quite the opposite. We have very little insurance coverage, just 10% or less. And so it's mostly out of pocket if you're paying for it, or in the government hospitals, orange card and yellow card, you're going to go to a government hospital and their limitations are just like the UK, where they don't always have immediate care for you unless it's very critical, right?
So, Dr. Nene, this brings up a very important aspect that, we know that we have a inequitable healthcare system in our country. While we are also, one is the care that we have, the quality of care. And second challenge is, while we are trying to fill our hospitals, we are desperately doing marketing, etc., to fill the hospital in a major city, we don't have the facilities available in the, tier 3, tier 4 or the rural areas. Technology seems to be bridging that gap in absence of trained people being available. So what are some of the trends that you see, or the technological advancements in diagnosis, surgeries, post-surgery care that will be the trend in the coming year that could be the game changer in healthcare?
So Harbinder, it's a great question, because honestly, it's a numbers game, right? We don't have enough trained healthcare professionals. We don't have enough hospitals and training centers to generate enough. and our population is arguably growing at leaps and bounds and living longer. As I see it, to put this in context, more people will be succumbing to chronic illnesses, lifestyle acquired illnesses like heart disease, strokes, diabetes, and hypertension than they are to infectious complications. And as a result of that, what you and I have to do is kind of recenter the dialogue. And what needs to happen is several things. The first is something very interesting. I think we need to educate and entertain. My kids were watching House MD and ER and a few of the medical dramas, and they would come to me with questions, and they were learning more about illnesses than I could have ever taught at a seminar, right? And they were learning in a way where they would remember it. And so some of my pursuits were born from that epiphany that if you can, rather than being on a soapbox, entertain and educate, and do it early and often, and do it in the style which we're known for in the film industry in India, then all of a sudden it appeals to a different part of the brain. So the first thing is we need to empower patients with knowledge so that they can take care of themselves and know what the risk factors, signs and symptoms, and expectations for care will be. The second thing is, from a technology standpoint, I think there's huge advances in AI, machine learning, generative AI, as well as cloud-based technology. The third thing is we've always been the last to get the latest technology because we're the developing world. And what I see by 2050 is our economy will blossom, if not sooner, where we will become a top 5 economy. And why I see that is A, we have a volume multiplier. B, we have a very, very smart population. You take Indians, you put them anywhere on the planet, they just won't succeed, but they'll dominate. You look at all the high techs in the US, they've all got Indians leading them. Look at the guys in universities, you look at the guys in medicine, they're all Indians. And maybe there was a brain drain, which accounts for some of that. But I would say even in India, the type of startups and things which are happening now are immense. The second thing is, we have the ability, using the tremendous fiber. So the Prime Minister some years ago has put a plan in place for 3 things. One is that every home should have an internet connection. And that's happened from 2011 to now. You see how many people have access to the internet through mobile phones or through, when I came, there were only 150 million internet connections in 2011, of which 50 million were mobile. Now it's blossomed to 700 million and the majority are mobile. And it leapfrogs the divide. But what's happening is they're laying down fiber now. So A, you'll have a bigger backbone so people can search. And listen, the University of YouTube is always open. Now, is that harmful? Yes, in some ways it is. But we'll get to that in a second. The second thing is the predictive AIs coupled with, quote unquote, deepfake technology and faces could be used as a means to give artificial consultants. And the real key to care is triage, knowing who needs what, when, right? And part of it is teaching you how to take care of yourself. The other part is giving you the right consultant and the right facility in the right time period. And in an ideal world, moving the pendulum back from acute care, where you're rushing in an emergency, to prevention, early recognition, and early treatment. When you do that, all of a sudden you treat a disease before it's a natural history study. Where you see heart disease is not when someone's had a massive heart attack and their EF is threatened and they need to go to the operating room, otherwise they'll die. You see them when they're just having chest pain, or better yet, when they just know what the risk factors are, like they have a first degree relative less than 50 who's died from heart disease, and you can get them to change their habits and then follow them over time and do the appropriate stress tests and all that. So what I see is it has to be a combination of technology and professionals on the right lines. And what technology should do is allow us to scale the professional interfaces. Where doctors could only see 10 patients in their waiting room, they'll be able to monitor 1,000 patients, where patients will have continuity of care and dashboards seeing how they're doing. Like at any given time, I've got a dozen sensors, like this ring's a sensor, this watch is a sensor, I have another sensor. and I'm looking at my variables. So if we can collect all that data, identify who's at risk for what, and then have a feedback loop, and then give them great media to inform them, a great smart services module to give them best-in-class providers in their area, all of a sudden we will be able to move that pendulum from acute care to prevention, early recognition, early treatment. So I see huge advances in every single division. And the biggest one is that we scale, because doctors work their tails off. The whole healthcare profession does. And you saw this in COVID, where they put their lives on the line day in, day out, without any type of reward, except for being away from their families, sometimes losing their homes because their neighbors didn't want them there, sometimes being yelled at. And you know what? My heart went out to them, and I supported them through all of this. We worked together with the Prime Minister, the Chief Minister, with different healthcare systems to make sure that we could adapt. And I think India overall did pretty well in COVID. I think we learned those lessons and we apply them now, and we become the #1 economy and the #1, lifespan on the planet through a combination of healthcare and technology.
No, I think you explained it really well, and I think India is poised to make a difference to the global healthcare, because we produce some of the best doctors. We have also produced some of the best engineers. So I think we are in a position to be able to make a difference to the world. Dr. Nene, you have yourself. You're a healthcare professional. You are also now investing in technology, both in terms of not just money, but also your time and knowledge, to make a difference. What do you think that the policymakers need to do to make quality healthcare accessible to ensure better outcomes? And I've consciously left out the word heart care and cardiac care, because this has to go with that. And
100%.
also, so what do you think that the policymakers need to do, and what is it that needs to be addressed in our upcoming budget?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I will tell you one interesting fact, that heart disease globally is the #1 killer of people, and it's striking at a much younger age. But that aside, we don't even have a all-cause mortality counter in India. We don't know what people are dying of. And so if you don't have data to guide your decisions, then how are you going to make the right decisions? But what I see is this, that they've done an exceptional job with Ayushman Bharat, and some of the foundations we worked with, like iSpirit. They created the medical pipelines on which everything else can be built and handed it over to them. iSpirit was one foundation we were involved with, and I was working with through the pandemic and even before. And they also created UPI. So I see that as a potential force for good. The second thing is they have been very liberal about startups. And what I see is that there's a lot of people, young people, who are now taking the plunge. And it's not just engineers and entrepreneurs. Doctors want to do this. Now, I find it incredibly hard for physicians to do this and practice, because, a full-time practice is a full mind exercise. You have to be focused on your patients. And when I pivoted to create companies, a family office, 3 startups that I incubated myself, and then multiple startups that I invested in and mentored, all of a sudden I was trying to scale my presence without focusing on just one thing. And so what I think the government needs to do in their budgets is set aside some money. And what I would say the first thing is to set up a roadmap and a timeline over which we need to achieve our targets, and significant goals. Say in year 1, I want to do this. Year 2, I want to do this. I think it needs to be a hub and spoke model, where we keep the centers of highest excellence in the main areas with corollaries and technology-driven, outbound sort of virtual presences, as well as physical presences. I have a friend who owns the Hindujas. They own Ashok Leyland, and they have these mobile hospital vans which go all over the place. And they were more than happy to loan this out to us, so you could take a whole medical suite out there. The third part of this is the data has to be owned by the patient. It cannot be owned by a government. It cannot be owned by a company. And those patients, through biometric keys on a blockchain, need to give permission for anyone to use it. Only then will we be safe from any type of interruption of continuity, because as you realize, as insurance becomes more prominent, they're going to deny care. And the way they do that is through this data. With governments, if you give the biometric care to the people, or biometric keys to the people you trust, you're going to see with a blockchain exactly who's accessed your data. Now, who's going to pay for that? Ultimately, it has to be the patient. But I would say in the high net worth patients, we build a concierge unit. In the middle class, we do a subscription model. And in the less fortunate, we build a foundation with CSR money. And we use the same engines that are powering everything and hand those off to Ayas and Angadwadi workers and physician care extenders. But only in that way are we going to get it out. And when you think about this, the data we'll have in India, just by virtue of its size, will be able to power any type of equations. Now you add a generative AI to that, and you add a face to that, all of a sudden you've got something so powerful with up to 100 trillion data points, and you will change the way medicine's practiced. Because we'll see, I'll give you an example, you'll see 100 million people with diabetes. I think at any given time, 14 to 20% of Indians will have diabetes that we know of. And it's even more than that in some areas. If I can work with them and negotiate something on their behalf and get them better rates and better care with the pharma and the hospital corporations, at the same time becoming a lead generator for all my peers in a transparent fashion and getting everyone remunerated at a reasonable cost, all of a sudden you're changing how medicine is practiced. Gone are the negative practices which were impacting it, and that I'm sure you're aware of. Gone are the fiduciary kind of shareholder issues, and you're focused with the patient in the center of the universe again, and they're the ones directing their care.
Yeah. So, Dr. Nene, you're setting up a healthcare platform which is called the Pathfinder Health Sciences. Would you like to share a little bit more about it?
Yeah, I can tell you the basics without going into nitty-gritty. The concept is simple, right? How do you scale healthcare to all of the world using a combination of media technology and smart services? So we're designing constructs, and I think it'll be a collaborative effort in that I'm building a platform, not a simple product or service, right? And the idea is to incorporate all my other brethren in and make it something which they become part of and can enjoy, with the intent that it always has to serve the patient. So the biggest shareholder is our patient. And the idea is simple, that if I can put a doctor in your pocket 24/7, 365, just helping you decide what your path will be, hence the name, Pathfinder, and that's based on hard data. And then we follow it with feedback loops and use all types of cloud and generative AI, as well as physical physicians when you need it, and hospitals and caregivers, using a hub and spoke model. All of a sudden will change how medicine is doled out, because right now the model is broken, right? We don't have, globally, not just in India, but globally, we don't have the necessary care in a timely fashion, and hence you see things which aren't treated in the appropriate time period. The other thing is, what's your happiness worth? And if I can put that to bed and help you, and not just in the medical realm, but maybe looking at the financials, maybe looking at other things which make your life worth living, and focusing on the things which actually matter, your family and friends, all of a sudden it becomes a holistic 360-degree view of how we design a healthcare system, because that's really what it should be. It should be not just your body, but it should be your mind and your soul, which are engaged. And that sounds a little hokey, but even simple things like mental health are under represented. And we've got a huge problem, right? That has a stigma attached, and it's really a medical problem. I mean, we need to accept that. In the pandemic, it became abundantly clear, and people are still struggling from that. But I'm saying even the simple things like diabetes, they can all be reversed, right? It's not something you can't do. And they just become diet-controlled diabetics rather than pill-controlled, and the complication rate goes down dramatically. right? So I think, what we're designing is interesting in that it changes the way we practice, right? And it gives the patient's continuity of care, end-to-end, cradle-to-grave providers who will always be there and are aligned with their interests, with no one else's. It will give the doctors the infrastructure they need, because the biggest problem they face right now is they don't have the medical infrastructure, and they're literally jumping from one hospital to another or one patient to another. I mean, when you go to see the doctor, they'll see you for 5 minutes, write you a chitti and send you on your way. But the problem is they don't always have time to explain everything. And so how are you going to prevent the next instance? And then for the hospitals, pharma, and these guys, it will become a critical lead generator with patients who are better equipped and know what they need. And then for governments and corporates, it'll reduce the cost of healthcare delivery. And by doing that, you'll come in at a earlier point, and the number of procedures won't go down, the number of diseases we treat won't go down, but what'll happen is the outcomes will be far superior because you're treating them much earlier in the disease process. And as a result, your absenteeism will go up, your cost of delivering care in terms of GDP will go down, and your potential productivity, both in the corporate workplace as well as in the government and other areas, will go up dramatically because your happiness equation will be different. You won't be sick. And then the last thing is India's paternalistic, and that's changing, but when the main person who's providing for the family is interrupted, that can lead to medical bankruptcy, and it can lead to many people starving, not just the main person. So I'm saying if we intervene early and often, we can protect that. And, these things, the critical things for me globally, and the things we focus on are improving healthcare, improving education. And in doing those two things alone, I think we can change our path as a nation.
So Dr. Nene, I think, this is really nice because I keep talking about it, that sometimes disruption is not by displacing something and replacing it with something else, but disruption can also happen by building efficiency in the system. And another thing that comes to my mind that the system could do or should do is also bringing healthcare as a priority for women. Because if you look at the rural India, it's like you said, that the bread earner is the one who gets the priority, because that could be changing the economic situation of the family. The women tend to be put on a back burner. So
100%.
I hope that also changes with what you are doing.
Yeah, and the thing is that we are equal opportunity. We want to democratize healthcare, and we want everyone in the family to be dealt with properly and efficiently. And close to 50% of the country is women, right? If you miss that, these are people now in the metro. Certainly you have dual income households, but even elsewhere, look, we all have mothers and wives and sisters, and they are more important, not equally important, more important in many ways in birthing a nation. And if we neglect them because we think the only one that matters is the person who's earning the bread and butter, we are neglecting our whole future. And so I think it should be something we internalize. And then, those cultural norms will take time in some parts of the country. But I think the sooner we realize that it is important to appreciate and give gratitude to everyone and pay respect to everyone, the faster as a nation we grow and we start to appreciate each other's value.
Absolutely. So Dr. Nene, what about your future plans? You're a surgeon at heart, you're a surgeon by training. Would you rather focus on your startups and the impact that you're creating using technology in the healthcare, or would you like to bring back your focus on cardiac surgeries in India at any point in time?
So if I did it, so I think you can answer that one pretty easily. It's a matter of a scale game, right? Where can I be most effective at helping save lives and improve lifestyles? And I would say the former is a much stronger argument, meaning if I can scale medicine to 7 billion, 8 billion people on the planet by creating these things, then I have really done my job and used all my skill sets. That said, to your other point, I love to create and I love to build. And, I may do cases for charity with Doctors Without Borders or participate in the clinical setting in different ways, like doing camps or something. But I'll be very honest with you, and I'm very cognizant. I was a very highly trained specialist, and in order to be good at what I did, it was the practice of medicine. You had to do heart surgery each and every day to be the best at what you did. I don't think it would be fair to do it once in a while and be an itinerant surgeon. And so, to be perfectly plain, I'm still boarded, I'm still licensed, and I still do my CMEs, and the information base is there. But I'm not, it's not fair for me to operate on a patient and abandon them. I would never do that. And so I think if you're going to do it regularly and do it with full heart, and don't hesitate. And even now, I take care of a lot of patients vis-a-vis my family. In the pandemic, we were triaging and admitting people, and I'm still capable of doing it. But the problem is, it's a one box solution. It's sort of like if you think about Amazon, if they move one box at a time, how big could they get? Whereas if you move 1,000 boxes in a row, your scalability and taking care of people becomes much larger. And I have the deepest respect for my colleagues, and I work with them regularly to improve their outputs and to help them do whatever they need to do. And I keep up with the information, and I'm very curious all the time. As I said, I love to learn, I love to read, I love to experience, and I love people around me who feel the same way, because listen, every moment happens just once, and there's certain things that you can negotiate as in business as well as in life, like money and things like that. Time is not something that comes back. And so you got to pick how you spend your seconds, minutes, hours, and who you spend them with. And that's what makes life worth living. And so if I'm in the operating room, I loved what I did, but it's not scalable for me. And I think you see my skill sets and what I can do. And I just think that I'm better presented to kind of build systems and platforms which can accommodate many more people. And at the same time, I'm a intermediary because I've done both. And so I can step into both worlds and negotiate effectively and say, look, I understand the shoes you're walking in. And I've done that for 1,000 steps. And I also understand being the patient. I also understand being in business. Now, how do we bring those all together with technology and do something that works? So to answer your question, I don't see myself walking back as a clinician full time. I don't think that would be a really good use of my time. Would I do it on a charity basis and go and donate my time? 100% I would. And I would never hesitate, so long as it was clear that I'm not the principal caregiver, because I would never, ever compromise in a patient's care.
Dr. Nene, that couldn't have been a more honest answer to what I asked. Dr. Nene, my next question is something which I've been dying to ask you. Because in my past career, I have been responsible and I've been a part of the team that launched YouTube in India. And I know that you've set up a YouTube channel and you have got a great response. Would you like to tell us about it and your thoughts behind starting the channel, and what has been your experience doing so?
Yeah, it's a great question. So look, the University of YouTube is always open. And during the pandemic, I just learned droves about shooting cameras, about singing, about playing guitar, about learning with my kids. I think our paradigms for education have changed, because you don't have to go to a university. We've got enough examples of people who have learned on their own. And I think if you have a will, there's a way. So the channel actually came up during the pandemic. And, we had planned something in healthcare to educate and entertain. And we were looking at a larger platform where we actually did a little bit of everything. And we really, really hit hard. But YouTube became a logical starting point, because in the pandemic, what was happening is there was an equally potent infodemic. People were dying of the COVID, lung disease, but it was worse because people were getting heart disease from the stress of worrying about this and the infodemic that was going on. And what I realized is what we needed to do was A, simplify, and B, give evidence-based international standards to everyone. So what we created was a YouTube channel, and we named it Dr. Nene, but not so much for me, but just so it was an identifier. And the idea was simple, that we would use evidence-based links to derive our information and provide those in the description. And we would speak in a manner which was easily digestible by the layperson. Because I've given many talks and published many papers on scientific forums and had evidence-based discussions as well as peer-reviewed things. But what we wanted to do was take this out to the Aam Aadmi. And I agree that it was only in English initially. Now we're getting it dubbed and subtitled in a number of different languages, because I think the messaging is very clear and we've done it in a way that's fairly effective. And I think you can comment more than I can because you're on the outside looking in. But it's been very heartening to see the response, that initially they only viewed me in one tense. And then when they started seeing the information, my goal was to start a dialogue. And it wasn't about just me speaking, it was about everyone coming together and thinking about their own health. And what I meant was that we need to empower them to take care of themselves, to understand, what's important and what isn't. That in heart disease, these are the things, in simple things. And we've done everything from simple stuff to more complicated stuff. And it's been interesting. We just crossed 200,000 subscribers a couple of weeks ago, and it was cheers to the team. And the other thing is, I believe in very, very cohesive teams. And so I'll tell you, I give a lot of credit to my team, because there's no I in team. And while I'm one of the front faces, the truth is, it takes a lot of people coming together to do something special. And that's true for all teams. So I give a lot of credit to them. But most of all, I give it to the viewers, because they've been so ridiculously cool to work with. And that's the thing with social media, that I think if used properly, it can be a source of positivity and within reason, right? I put something up the other day on my timelines and I said, look, it's good to be unplugged. And don't sit on that. I'm sure you've seen the social network and understood the social equation of how these companies bait you, clickbait, as they say. What I'm trying to do is pull away from that and give you something substantive where you can learn something about your life in an entertaining and somewhat easy fashion, and you'll remember it, so that the next time you get into a situation, you can bank on that and you can improve, and we can move that pendulum sooner. And so I would say I would encourage everyone to try it, because it's interesting and it's tough for everyone to do it. I'd given a lot of talks in different forums. I was very comfortable with the format, and I've been very active in leadership and whatnot. And so giving talks is not an issue. The camera didn't really add much of an issue. And I live in a household where we're in front of cameras all the time, unfortunately. And so I was very comfortable. And so I don't know, I would ask you, what are your thoughts? Have you seen any of the episodes?
You know what? I anyways feel that YouTube, because I have a 11-year-old, and I keep wondering whether I should pull him away from the digital media or allow him to learn from it. So it's not about, I think, YouTube, like you said, it's a YouTube university. There's a lot of good that is happening, provided people get to access content that can add value to them and their lives. And that was one of the earlier reasons because of which I got onto healthcare in the first place. I'm not a doctor. I don't. I come from a digital space. Like I said, I used to work with Google, YouTube, etc. One of the things that I felt was that we have to look at it as content creators' responsibility to make something useful in a usable manner available to people. And I think that's what you are doing. And I wish you continue this journey and take it to the next level.
I think you put it beautifully, and you recognize the benefits and the pitfalls. And I think for the 11-year-olds, my 17 and 19-year-old, we need to curate it to some degree, and we need to watch together, because there are harmful elements as well. And no one's going to filter it the way you and I will. But if you've trained your kids with your values and said, look, this is it. Sometimes you need to be exposed to the garbage so you recognize that it's garbage, because there's people in life, who are going to present things to you which are not on the up and up. And we did this with that intent to produce great content, which people would, follow. And we've done it in a social way where it's not so heavily medical that you just go to sleep, or alternatively, you are, really like, what is he talking about, And then we've tried to incorporate other elements, and it'll get even more interesting. A lot of it we started in the pandemic, so I didn't have access. I was using Zoom, and we couldn't go out and shoot, and I had to learn how to do everything. I didn't even have a cameraman or anything, and so I went to YouTube, and I went to my wife's colleagues to teach me how to do all of that. So that was another journey for another day. But my point is, life is worth doing and learning and continuing this kind of pursuit. And I will firmly say that we're creating a brand around it and trying to give people what they need. And it's not just my brand. I would love to see you on the channel talking about your healthcare journey and talking about what you espouse, because it's starting a dialogue of really interesting people and getting patients and people to kind of come together and speak about themselves and feel comfortable. It's almost like a support group in ways, but the idea is that we have to be there for each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It'll be my honor if I can get onto that channel sometime.
100%. I would love to host you, and would love to have the tables turned to some degree and give you the questions in advance, and love to see your thinking, because you see it all as a journalist. And, I was talking to a lot of journalists about this, and I said, look, would you feel comfortable joining me on the channel? Because I would love to see what you did during COVID, Barca, and a lot of people are willing to do that. So we're going to do that. And also talk to ordinary people, on the ground, and see what their experience was, and also to see what challenges they're facing. Because unless we can walk in each other's shoes for 1,000 steps, as they say, we'll never really understand what challenges we're facing. And we can never really administer to each other the cures that need to be there. It'll just be cookbook medicine, and I don't like that. I think it has to be customized.
Absolutely. Dr. Nene, before I let you go, my last question to you, and it is not about healthcare, it is not about your startup, it is about you. What do you do in your free time? I've heard you speaking that you play guitar. What exactly is a stress buster for you?
So I love to play sports, and I'm an avid tennis player. I love to go to the gym. So sports have been a central focus in my life forever. And it wasn't just to bodybuild or something like that. I did it because it was fun, and I got a lot of social inputs, and I got a lot of play buddies. And, even now, I think that's been something. I love music, and I love to sing, and I love to play guitar. And the whole family, actually, in the pandemic, we would do jam nights. And we were very fortunate to have enough space and, all the instruments to come together and just rap and play and have fun. And then I love to cook, and you've seen that on some of my episodes. And that's an interesting story where in college, one of my responsibilities was to take care of, in the fraternity, to take care of the kitchen responsibilities. And they had a big chef, and this guy could make meals for like thousands of people, and he could do it from scratch. So I learned a ton from him, and then that evolved. And so it was like organic chemistry on another level, where you combine different flavors and spices. And the enjoyment was that food was love. It's what you gave to people, and it's what your mother gave to you, your wife gave to you. But it was also, in the wrong proportion, something that could, cause issues. So now as a physician, we're creating a series potentially on one of the OTTs on that. And so it's been something very interesting. I also have other things. I love reading. I love gardening. I love doing a lot of different disparate things. I love, coming together and having great conversations like today, where you can learn stuff from each other and kind of move in the right direction.
Dr. Nene, thank you so much for your time. I can tell you that this has been such an enjoyable conversation for me. And it was such a pleasure to have your thoughts on what you are doing and why you are doing what you are doing. I think that is really, really important. Thank you so much for taking out time to speak with us at BW Healthcare World.
Harbinder, it's an absolute pleasure. And I hope we meet in person at some point. I'm in and out of Delhi, but the bottom line is I wish everyone well. And, you know, there's challenges, but I see them as opportunities, and I see the ability to do good. And I think if everyone keeps that motive and sort of keeps it as a central mantra for their lives, all of a sudden the world will become a better place. So it's been a pleasure spending time with you. And I hope it helps people in what they're doing. And I hope people come along for the journey, and, you know, we create a dialogue together, which is louder than all the noise, which we're seeing in the world. And we kind of move beyond things together.